He's not letting go!
Clear the stands. She's moving. Barely contact.
Please, help me!
Maji's circling. He's coming back. Keep those cannons on him. Don't let him close again. She's gone. She's gone.
Samantha Vierra wasn't simply another face in the crowd at the zoo that morning. She was a woman in search of something she couldn't quite name an encounter, a connection, something that might bridge the gulf between human and beast. By sundown, that pursuit would spiral into a violent, unforgettable end. At 27, Samantha's friends knew her as a restless free spirit, a woman who carved her own winding paths. Raised in the still, tree-lined streets of a California suburb, she grew up with a quiet but insistent pull toward the natural world. While other kids chased soccer balls or clung to malls, she hiked alone into nearby hills, listening for the low hum of wind in the oaks and the distant cry of birds. That fascination matured into a hunger to find the hidden rhythms she swore were embedded in every living thing. She spent years moving between continents, joining spiritual communes in the Pacific Northwest, spending seasons in Southeast Asia, learning meditation, and volunteering at animal sanctuaries that smelled of straw and musk. Her work was never about adrenaline. Samantha wasn't reckless, and those who loved her would have sworn she was incapable of malice toward anything alive. She was gentle, almost disarmingly soft-spoken, and so fiercely empathetic that she seemed allergic to cynicism. To her, every creature, furred, feathered, or scaled, carried an intelligence worth listening to. It was a beautiful belief, but one so idealized it left no room for the truths written in fang and claw. Her social media pages were an uninterrupted mosaic close-ups of her cross-legged and sun-dappled forests, quotations about the interconnectedness of all souls, impassioned threads about animal rights. She preached about dissolving the invisible fences humans place between themselves and other species. To her, animals weren't spectacles, they were equals, perhaps even teachers. In her eyes, they had souls and could meet her on some unspoken wavelength, if only approached without fear. Her work reflected that faith. Part-time, she taught yoga folding in slow, deliberate poses, modeled after cranes, cobras, and tigers. She sold nature-inspired mandala art from a cramped studio, its shelves cluttered with feathers, antlers, and stones she'd collected on long walks. She owned little beyond her art tools and a battered hiking pack. Friends joked she was easier to reach in a grove of trees than in her own apartment. She had a way of scanning the horizon as if she saw patterns invisible to others, patterns that told her life was deeper than its surface. That outlook shaped her final decision. On that day, she believed she could step into a space most people wouldn't even dream of approaching. Maji, the male African lion in the San Francisco Zoo's Pride exhibit, was a living emblem of power. 450 pounds of muscle and bones, standing just under 4 feet at the shoulder, his bulk moved with a grace that belied the damage it could deliver. Born in the zoo 8 years earlier, Maji had grown into a broad-shouldered brute crowned with a thick, shadowy mane that framed amber eyes. Even raised in captivity, his body carried every gift of his ancestors, a spine built for explosive sprints, claws like hooked knives, and jaws that could crush with 650 pounds of pressure. Visitors saw majesty. Keepers saw boundaries. They described him as calm until those limits were tested. A slow roll of muscle under his hide, a resonant growl that trembled the air, a fixed, unblinking stare. These were his lines in the sand. He'd never attacked a handler from behind the barricades, but the warnings were etched in his size and the weapons he carried in every limb. Metal signs screamed the truth in capital letters, "Do not cross barriers." But Samantha's warnings weren't printed on placards. They came from within her own habits, shaped by months of spiritual immersion and an eroding respect for man-made borders. Friends noticed her slipping further into abstract talk about merging with animal spirits and dropping the fear that cages them. She told stories of crouching to meet the eyes of strays, extending her hand until they accepted her presence. None had ended badly, and those small victories seemed to reinforce her belief that purity of intent was armor enough. 7 days before the incident, she posted a long entry to her journal. "We cage them, not only with steel, but with fear. What if we opened our hearts? What if we understood their language through spirit, not words?" A close friend who later refused to be named recalled her musing about feeling the energy of large predators to cut through their learned distrust. The friend had laughed it off. The idea sounded poetic, not like a plan, But there were hints the zoo knew risk was growing not from her, but from people like her. An internal 1998 memo mentioned more visitors pushing boundaries for photos and urged stronger deterrence. It was a footnote in a larger safety debate, not a prophecy. No one expected what August 19th, 1999 would bring. Starting of that fateful day, the sun rose hard and clean over San Francisco, casting long, gold-tipped shadows across the zoo's pathways. The morning air carried a sharp edge cool enough to sting the lungs laced with the faint, resinous tang of eucalyptus drifting in from the hills. By midday, the San Francisco Zoo pulsed with life. Strollers rattled over brick paths, balloons bobbed against the sky, and the mingled noise of laughter, squealing children, and the metallic clink of concession carts filled the grounds. Samantha Vierra stepped through the gates alone, draped in loose, pale clothing that caught the light breeze. She moved without haste, her posture upright, her face composed, almost ritualistic in its calm. Witnesses would later remark on the deliberation of her pace. She drifted past flamingo ponds and aviary domes, spending long minutes at the tiger enclosure. Then the jaguar habitat eyes fixed her head, tilting as though measuring each movement of the cats. Eventually, she reached the lion exhibit, an open African savanna replica of sun-baked stone ledges, scrub grass, and a shallow pool. A wide, dry moat and tall reinforced glass panels kept the public at bay. Warning placards in English and Spanish plastered the railings, "Do not cross. Dangerous animals." At about 1:30 in the afternoon, Samantha stopped. Maji lay stretched on a sun-warmed rock, massive paws dangling over the edge, amber eyes half-lidded. For several minutes, she stood unmoving. Then her palms settled on the final barrier rail. She closed her eyes, briefly head bowed. To those nearby, it looked like prayer. The calm shattered when she lifted herself into the low wall, swung a leg over, and began scaling the fence. Shouts erupted. "Hey, get down!" someone yelled. She didn't react. In one smooth climb, she cleared the top, balanced along the narrow ledge, then dropped into the moat with a thud that sent up a puff of dust. Maji's head snapped up. His tail flicked once, twice the tip, whipping like a metronome of warning. Samantha advanced. Some swore they heard her speaking under her breath. Others only saw her extend an open hand. At 1:38, Maji coiled low haunches, bunching. His launch was a blur, 450 pounds of muscle and claw crossing the ground in less than 2 seconds. The roar punched the air, a wall of sound. Then came the collision, a thump that reverberated in the chest dust, exploding around them. Her scream followed high sharp, swallowed almost instantly by the guttural snarls. His jaws clamped her torso, the bite compressing with enough force to splinter bone. He shook once, twice as her feet lifted clear off the ground, then dragged her deeper toward the boulder shadows. Blood spattered across his mane, streaked the pale dust beneath them, darkening fast. Crowds shrieked. Phones dropped, some still recording in trembling frames. Others kept filming, capturing the jerking movements as she struggled, her arms flailing against his grip. Zoo staff pounded into view, hauling wheeled carts stacked with gear. Twin water cannons came first, white jets slamming into Maji's flank, hard enough to flatten fur and ripple skin. He dropped her crouched low ears, flattened, then circled wide. Meat was flung, noisemakers popped like gunshots. He ignored both. In 3 strides, he closed the gap again, clamping onto her shoulder. Her body barely reacted this time. Paramedics crouched just outside the fence line, stretchers ready, but unable to cross. Every second bled into the next sirens, air horns, the roars, the panic cries of children wailing into their parents' coats. Zookeepers pressed forward, finally forcing him back with overlapping water blasts and the battering percussion of air horns. Maji snarled back into a chute, and the gate slammed shut. The enclosure floor was a churned mess of dust and crimson. Samantha's body lay face up, clothing shredded, limbs slack. Staff moved in, lifting her onto a stretcher. The injuries were catastrophic, multiple deep punctures along the chest and abdomen, crushing damage to ribs, massive blood loss, soaking the gurney fabric before they cleared the pen. By the time the ambulance doors closed, there was no pulse. She was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. The coroner would later list the cause as exsanguination and traumatic shock, the wounds consistent with repeated bites from an adult male lion. News bulletins were running before the zoo gates, fully emptied. Woman mauled by lion scrolled under shaky cell phone footage. Samantha approaching the blur of Maji's charge, then chaos. By nightfall, satellite trucks crowded the street outside. Visitors left flowers, candles, and handwritten notes at the fence. The memorial grew by the hour. Within a single day of the mauling, the chain-link fence outside the San Francisco Zoo had transformed into a wall of grief. Bouquets of lilies, roses, and wildflowers leaned against it in thick clusters, their scent heavy in the cold bay air. Candles flickered in glass jars, wax pooling on the pavement. Handwritten notes curled in the wind, taped to the metal, some speaking of Samantha Vierra's compassion, others asking why. Strangers who had never met her knelt to leave trinkets. Others stood back, arms folded, unable to reconcile her fatal decision. By mid-morning, the grief site swelled into a rally. Animal rights activists arrived in small groups, then in waves. They hoisted hand-painted banners, "Justice for Samantha in captivity now." Chants echoed down the street, amplified by megaphones. Several protesters carried in large still frames from the attack footage. Maji, mid-lunge, dust and furs suspended mid-air, forcing passers-by to confront the violence head-on. Online, the storm was immediate. Hashtags calling for stricter zoo security and mental health awareness surged into trending lists. Thousands of shares carried shaky videos from the attack, replayed and dissected in endless loops. By nightfall, Samantha's name was in headlines worldwide. The zoo's official response came fast, polished, and careful. A press statement read by a visibly strained spokesperson described the event as an unforeseeable tragedy and an isolated incident. They promised a sweeping internal investigation, a full audit of safety protocols, and a review of visitor engagement guidelines. Cameras caught the flicker of unease when reporters pressed about Maji's fate. For now, he was removed from public view, kept under watch in a private holding enclosure. His future remained a question mark. Behind closed doors, another narrative was forming. A leaked government safety report stamped confidential, outlined vulnerabilities in the lion habitat's first line of defense. While the moat and glass wall offered strong deterrence, the initial low wall and fence could be scaled by someone determined enough. The report also noted a glaring absence of procedures for handling visitors displaying erratic behavior and no formal training for staff in de-escalating such situations. Digital forensics uncovered emails on Samantha's personal computer written weeks before the attack, describing her desire to merge with the spirits of predators. Investigators added these to her profile, a troubling lens through which her final act now looked less like a misstep and more like a deliberate test of belief against nature's laws. Public pressure grew. Protest sizes doubled, then tripled. What began at the zoo gates spread to aquariums, marine parks, and wildlife sanctuaries across the country. Petitions for higher barriers, restricted access, and mandatory psychological screening for at-risk visitors climbed past 1 million signatures in under a week. News panels debated whether Samantha was a martyr for animal empathy or a cautionary example of human arrogance. Her name became shorthand invoked at rallies, printed on flyers, hashtagged into arguments. To some, she was the face of reform. To others, she was proof that romanticizing the wild invites disaster. Her death drove the conversation far beyond zoo walls. It reignited discussions about the nature of captivity, the limits of interspecies trust, and the danger of assuming that intention can override instinct. Wildlife experts invited to late-night interviews repeated the same phrase, "Boundaries exist for a reason." In August 1999, those boundaries were crossed. The result was written in blood on dry earth. Today, the lion enclosure at the San Francisco Zoo looks different. The glass rises higher. New metal extensions cap the original fence. Bright warning graphics in multiple languages confront every visitor before they reach the railing. Maji was eventually returned to his pride, resuming his slow circuits of the habitat as if nothing had changed. But for the zoo and for everyone who saw what happened, something had. The lights came back on the concession stands, reopened, and children's laughter once again threaded through the air. Yet an unshakable question remained. Are we protecting these animals, or are we still bending them to human narratives? And how many more lines must be crossed before the lesson lands not in words, but in the unspoken ancient language of the wild? And as the dust settles on this tragedy, one truth stands unshaken: nature doesn't bend to belief. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you think, talk about it. And if you want more real stories that cut through the noise, subscribe now and join us in facing the wild without crossing the line.